Gamers are a fickle bunch, especially when it comes to remakes. For every character redesign, there will be someone who loves the way they look, but also there will be someone who feels like you cursed their firstborn simply for making a few nips and tucks. But sometimes fans can actually agree on whether a design works or not, and in the case of these remake redesigns, it was a sadly unanimous thumbs down across the board. I'm Sai for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video game remake character designs everyone hated. Number 10, DINGODILE, Crash Bandicoot SANE Trilogy. DINGODILE is a dingo-crocodile hybrid who first appears as a boss in Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, perhaps best remembered for trying to burn Crash to a crisp with a giant flamethrower. Though 2017's SANE Trilogy did a mostly fantastic job of updating the series cast of delightfully demented characters, DINGODILE was the easy weak link among the pack. For starters, his more grotesque features were softened and rendered more cartoonish, as if to make him less frightening for kids. This extended to giving him a rounder face, a filed down set of fangs, and even slapping a pair of trousers on him to make him seem a bit more anthropomorphic and inoffensive. From aesthetics all the way through to the character's new voiceover, the SANE DINGODILE just lacks the mischievous menace of his 1998 iteration. Number 9, Psycho Mantis, Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes. Psycho Mantis is one of the most iconic antagonists in the Metal Gear Solid franchise, defined largely by his incredible psychokinetic powers, his distinctly raspy voice, and yes, his one-of-a-kind attire. In the original game, Mantis' armless jumpsuit and gas mask combo lent him an immediately eerie, off-putting quality, and while the Mantis boss fight is still mostly brilliant in the 2004 GameCube remake The Twin Snakes, the villain himself isn't quite so creepy. The new and shiny version of Mantis is a little tougher to take seriously because the added detail draws attention to just how closely his attire resembles a gimp suit, and his skin also lacks quite the same sickly pallid colour from the original game. At the end of the day, it's more of a touch-up than a revolutionary redesign, yet nevertheless one which made the character look a little sillier and less imposing. Number 8, James Bond, GoldenEye 007 2010. GoldenEye 007 is one of the most indelible FPS games of all time, and one of the few games adapted from a movie that's actually worth a damn. That said, it also aged extremely rapidly in the years following its release as the console FPS evolved, and so when a 2010 remake was announced, fans were ecstatic. However, the new GoldenEye wasn't simply a straight redo of the Pierce Brosnan starring original game, but a reimagining, which shifted the setting away from the Cold War and most crucially replaced Brosnan with his 007 successor, Daniel Craig. Though the new version of the game proved to be a solid shooter, many fans were dismayed by the decision to remake one of the most beloved games of all time while switching out the face of the protagonist. Many fans felt that swapping Brosnan for Craig was simply a cynical attempt at reinforcing the prevailing Bond brand at the time, given that the core adventure is still so thoroughly that of Brosnan's Bond, especially since it's based on a movie which he stars in. Playing as Daniel Craig felt a bit odd. Number 7, Chris Redfield, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Resident Evil 7 was a departure for the series in many ways, but one of these was a wholly original and very disconnected story from the franchise's history. As such, there were almost no returning characters save for the arrival of leading man Chris Redfield right in the closing moments. Taking off his helmet, introducing himself and lending a helping hand. Wait, who the hell is that? Chris's new face in RE7 was such a wild departure from what the character had looked like for the last near decade since Resident Evil 5 that at first genuine earnest speculation began that this was all a ruse, especially since the gentleman introduced himself merely as Redfield, perhaps a code name or a distant relative or even someone pretending to be Chris. Thanks to the photogrammetry used for RE7 to make everything look as real as possible in first person and especially VR, Capcom felt the importance of grounding Chris by casting a model to scan for the character. Problem was, he really didn't look like the BSAA's finest at all, a character that had, at this point, 20 years of history behind him. In the end, the studio abandoned this pseudo-Chris and leaned way more into his previous likeness in RE7's direct sequel, making this appearance a weird anomaly indeed. Number 6, basically everyone, LUFIA 2 Rise of the SINISTRALS. Beloved 1995 RPG sequel LUFIA 2 received a Nintendo DS remake back in 2010, with many of the team who worked on the original game returning to pull it off. Like GolDENEye though, it's perhaps better thought of as a reimagining with its significantly altered story and more combat-centric gameplay, not to forget its massively overhauled character designs. Unfortunately, most fans of the original game were less than impressed with the new designs, which ditched the very classic traditional high fantasy look of the original characters and made a desperate attempt to modernise them. Between how blatantly the new renditions resembled over-designed Final Fantasy characters and included needless modern affectations such as leather jackets and hoodies, it was a clearly brazen attempt to make LUFIA appeal to a wider audience, and one that ultimately failed completely. Number 5. GUYBRUSH THREEPWOOD Monkey Island 2 Special Edition. This is an especially amusing example of how easily the most minor aesthetic character change in a remake can result in considerable fanbase backlash. For the first 2 games in the Monkey Island series, lovable protagonist GUYBRUSH THREEPWOOD touted a distinctive brown mane of hair before the 3rd game, The Curse of Monkey Island, decided to give him a blonde ponytail which he's proudly worn ever since. But when a special edition remake of Monkey Island 2 LeChuck's Revenge was released in 2010, fans were dismayed to find that GUYBRUSH's hair had been changed from brown to blonde by LucasArts. While on one hand GUYBRUSH had been blonde for over a decade by this point, nitpicking fans were irritated that LucasArts made such an unnecessary, deliberate change from the dark-haired iteration of the character in the original Monkey Island 2. And so the next time you think video game fans are insufferable when they complain about design changes, at least their issues typically amount to more than a character's hairdo. Number 4. Edward CARNBY, Alone in the Dark. Edward CARNBY is the protagonist of the Alone in the Dark franchise, a paranormal investigator, and if we're being honest, sometimes a bit of an unbearable arsehole. But CARNBY's original design intended to make him look like a pretty regular guy, sporting a red mane of hair and moustache, along with a suit ensemble as he battled evil supernatural forces. The character was given his first edgy makeover in 2001's original reboot, Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare, where CARNBY was reworked into a long-haired trenchcoat-wearing hunk, though it wasn't until 2008's reimagining, simply titled Alone in the Dark, that fans got really mad. In addition to the 2008 Alone in the Dark being a genuinely terrible game, CARNBY was dragged so far from his original design as to basically be a different person entirely. Looking like he stumbled out of an LA modelling agency with his perfectly tailored jacket and jeans and sexy messy hairdo, the new CARNBY ticked pretty much every box on the generic video game protagonist checklist. Number 3. The TEDIZ, CONKER Live and Reloaded. One of the most memorable enemies in the deliciously deranged original Conker's Bad Fur Day is the TEDIZ, a race of Nazi-like killer robot teddy bears who hungover, foul-mouthed squirrel protagonist Conker is forced to face off against. In this version of the game, the TEDIZ are genuinely unsettling, uncanny creations, as best exemplified by their black pinhole eyes, which perfectly indicate their inherent soullessness. But for 2005's remake Conker Live and Reloaded, Rare decided to tone down the game's more adult content, stripping away much of the graphic violence and profanity, and in the case of the TEDIZ, also giving their design a bit of a Disneyfication. In Live and Reloaded, the TEDIZ now have more cartoonishly approachable large yellow eyes and are also kitted out in cute military uniforms and helmets. Granted, they are still murderous monsters all the same, but the creepiness of that initial design is sanitized almost entirely. Number 2. SHEILA, SPYRO Reignited Trilogy. Much like Crash Bandicoot N. Sane Trilogy, Spyro Reignited Trilogy did a mostly bang-up job with its character redesign, save for one exception, SHEILA the Kangaroo. SHEILA first appeared in 2000's threequel, Spyro Year of the Dragon, and in addition to being insanely adorable, is also one of the game's additional playable characters. Despite the Reignited Trilogy making few drastic changes to the series' major characters, SHEILA was given a bizarrely unnecessary overhaul, re-envisioned in the most obvious Pixar-baiting manner possible. From her red hair to her makeup, slimmer body and fitted outfit, the developers clearly wanted to signify she's a girl in neon lighting, but it ultimately just feels patronising. And number 1, Adolf Hitler, Persona 2 Innocent Sin. The original version of Persona 2 Innocent Sin, released solely in Japan in '99 for PlayStation, was controversial for a cameo appearance from Adolf Hitler, who is resurrected for a brief boss fight. Yes, really. This was one of several reasons which led to the game never being localized outside of Japan, at least until Innocent Sin was finally given the remake treatment for the PSP in 2011. But unsurprisingly, Hitler's presence was censored in the remake, with his name changed to Führer and his face obscured by a pair of sunglasses. Seriously, that's it. It's fair to say that most people were more bemused than frustrated with this one, but it did beg the question, if this was all the changes you were going to make, why couldn't you have released the game back in 1999 in the first place? It might be pretty obvious the Führer is actually Adolf Hitler, but how about video game characters that you didn't know were based on real people? Click the video on screen now to stay with us here at WhatCulture Gaming, and make sure you subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment down below which video game character redesign did you hate the most. I've been Sai for WhatCulture, and have a good week.